Welcome back. Tonight we get to the fun stuff.
Yay!
We finally arrived. We spoke about last week 3 areas of Kabbalistic study. Theoretical Kabbalah, which is more conceptual, delving into the nature of the metaphysical universe and the makeup of a human being and the makeup of Malachim, of the angels, like we spoke about last week. We mentioned the second area of Kabbalistic study is the meditative Kabbalah. And we're going to delve into that next week. Different techniques, different forms. And the third area was the practical Kabbalah. Practical, we said, basically means using the Kabbalistic insight to somehow manipulate and orchestrate things within nature. And that's where the stories of creating a golem comes from. That's practical Kabbalah. That's the ideas of doing things to avoid the ayin hara, the evil eye. Doing things in regards to palm reading or fortune telling. That whole area is under the category, or at least potentially under the category, of practical Kabbalah. Last week, we were finishing up our conversation in theoretical Kabbalah, and we discussed the nature of what it means to be a human being. We discussed the nature of angels as well, and how in a certain sense we're similar, that as long as we're here in the physical realm, we have to have this covering known as the body. We spoke about the majestic reality of the Torah, the essential Torah, the Torah that we have here on earth is really a porthole, is a door that allows us to enter the essential, the eternal Torah that's so above and beyond us. We spoke about a deeper appreciation of God. So even the name God is very hard for us to deal with, hard for us to really relate to. And we mentioned a Kabbalistic term for the Creator is the Ein Sof. Limitless, has no end. We spoke about as well the definition of spirituality. Spirituality from the Torah perspective is not about escaping from the world, it's about embracing life, being able to have conflict, being able to have relationships, and within the realm of normative human existence, to excel and to transcend. This week we get to practical Kabbalah. Practical Kabbalah, I'll give you a brief introduction. It's probably the most misunderstood, the most misapplied, and therefore the most dangerous realm of Kabbalistic research. The Zohar, for example, doesn't speak about practical Kabbalah at all. The entirety of the Zohar deals with theoretical Kabbalah, teaching us insights into the universe, what life is about, what God is about. No mention of anything in the practical realm of creating things or performing miracles. The Arizal, we mentioned in the first class, being the master of Kabbalah, he was very, very much against any practice of practical Kabbalah. And he forbade it. It's dangerous. It's not real, he felt. Now when he said it's not real, he didn't mean there was never a basis for such ideas, but he felt even in his time, in the 1500s, in Sfat, that was the climax of the Kabbalistic experience, but he felt they didn't have the wisdom to properly understand this area of Kabbalistic practice, and therefore he said, don't delve into this area at all, don't try to manipulate nature, don't even study those texts that speak about manipulating nature. And by and large, we have many sources that tell us that the texts that speak about these things, you can't even rely on. Because it hasn't been studied throughout the centuries, very likely there are a lot of mistakes that crept in there, and we really have no idea, even the texts themselves, if they're accurate. So the Zohar doesn't speak about it, the Arizal was not a fan of it in his time, and we have to understand what exactly is the difference, what is the distinction between practical Kabbalah and superstition. On the surface, they seem very connected. Are we allowed to be superstitious? You say yes.
Are we allowed to?
Are we allowed to? It's a free world. It's a free country.
It's true.
You can choose to do whatever you want to do. That's true. The truth is, though, the Torah itself tells us that we're not allowed to believe in many of the superstitious beliefs and theologies of the different pagan cults that were around 1,000 years ago. Some of the examples that the Talmud speaks about, very similar to things we hear about nowadays. If a black cat walks in front of you and you think that's a bad luck, it's a bad omen, that's a violation of the Torah prohibition of being superstitious. It's interesting to realize these things that are going around have been around for, at least 1,800 years. And there are many, many different prohibitions in the Torah that speak about these type of ideas. So we have a prohibition. You can't believe in anything superstitious. Question?
It's not a question. It's more or less, my mother grew up in Russia. And she had many, many superstitions. I think that people who were not educated, I'm not saying stupid, but were not educated, needed superstitious ideas to help explain the world.
You're 100% right. I mean, that's really the origin of all religion, barring what we view as reality. But going back before the Torah, before Abraham, what did you have in the world? You had a whole bunch of primitive people seeing the world around them, and it's thunder, it's lightning, and it's raining, and there's storms, and there's earthquakes, and there's volcanoes, and they have no idea how anything works. And it's based on just that lack of knowledge, based on that fear, human beings had to create all sorts of interesting, very imaginary type of ideas. And that is the same source for superstitious ideas, that's true. But the Torah comes along, and in a sense what the Torah is, like we've been discussing, the Torah is that ray of light that in the time that it was given, you have to realize the level of darkness that was in the world. All there was pagan cults. All there was superstition. And the Torah comes into this reality of darkness, and it says, no, this is not true. You have to live life according to reality. You can't be involved with any of these crazy ideas. So number one is, you can't be superstitious. There's a quote interesting from Francis Bacon. In all superstition, wise men follow fools. You could be the smartest of all men, the wisest of all men, but once the culture is doing something, so when I'm building the building, I can't have the 13th floor. I can't do it. Wise men follow fools. Issue number two, which is the very foundation of Judaism. And we spoke about this in the Judaism and Science series somewhat. The foundation of Judaism is use your brain. Be intellectually honest. If I'm following something because somehow it got into the culture and people are nervous for black cats or walking through ladders, whatever the case may be, that means I'm being totally blind to logic. I'm doing something based on no rationale whatsoever. And that, being one of the central themes of Judaism, the love of wisdom, the respect of wisdom, that's something we pursue, that's something we chase after our entire lives. So to do things that are totally foolish is really a denial of one of the main pillars that the Torah stands on. Not only am I being deficient in my Judaism, so to speak, when I believe in these types of things, I'm being deficient in what it means to be a human being. What elevates us over the animal kingdom? It's the fact that besides all the spiritual, qualitative differences that we have, but we have the intellectual capacity as well. If I don't use that, so then I'm no greater than a behemoth, I'm no greater than a cow or a donkey. So from the Jewish perspective, from Torah philosophy, doing things that don't make sense doesn't make sense. Now it's interesting, one might say, Does that mean that we don't believe in anything beyond mind, beyond intellect? Can you grasp the nature of God? And even after next week, you still won't be able to.
I don't think.
So there are certain things that we believe in, there are certain things that we feel comfortable with that are clearly well above and beyond the human intellect. But the idea is as follows, and this is a very crucial point, and it comes up, I think, in many areas of Jewish philosophy, which is, the goal is use your brain. Use it as much as possible. Now sometimes, when you use logic, that'll take you to a place where the next logical step is, you can't understand the next step. But it's still logical to believe it because that's where my mind took me. I'll give you an example of that. Shach, he was one of the great rabbis of the later part of the 20th century. And he has an essay where he says, I went to the Griz, Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik, who was the Brisker Rov, one of the giants of the previous generation. And I asked him the question that there seems to be a contradiction in Maimonides. In one place, when he speaks about the obligation to believe in God, he uses that word, believe. Every Jew is obligated to believe that there's a creator of the universe. That word in Hebrew is emunah. Lahamin is to believe. Elsewhere, Maimonides says, every Jew has the obligation to know that there's a creator of the universe. So if Shach turns to the Griz of Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik and says, how do you understand that contradiction? Is the obligation to know or is it to believe? And if it's possible to know, which we believe it is, so then why is there a need for a mitzvah to believe? You have knowledge, there's no need for belief. So, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik turns to Shach and he says, I had an exact same question, and when I was younger, I asked my father that question, Reb Chaim, the great Reb Chaim of Brisk. And my father told me as follows. He said they're both true. When the Rambam of Maimonides tells us you're supposed to know that there's a creator of the universe, that means don't just believe it because daddy and mommy said so. Don't just believe it because that's what the Cheder taught me. It's more than that. Understand why it makes sense. Understand why it has to be this way. Understand why that if you know there was a beginning, that means there's a beginner. Understand why when there's intricacy and depth in the creation and there's billions of neurons connecting in the human mind, that means there was a creator. You have to know all that. But then what? Where does that logic take you? That takes you to a place where you have to say that the creator of time and space is outside of time and space. Right? The author is not trapped within the novel. The painter is not trapped within the canvas. The creator of our reality isn't necessarily within our reality. Not to say God's not within our reality, but God is not trapped within our couple dimensions here. That means that logic takes me to the place where I therefore feel a conviction based on logic that the creator of the universe exists in a realm that's beyond our reality. Can you picture that? No, because I exist here. All I know is time and space. That's an example where we believe something and we have a relationship with the creator of the universe, something that we'll never be able to describe, and every time we use any word, God, creator, Ein Sof, it just limits that reality. But that's what logic dictates. So, very interesting balance. You start off with logic, and you take it as far as you could go. Many times, the logical conclusion is, there's something beyond my human intellect, and therefore logic dictates embracing. But in general, we have to be logical, we have to use our brains. Blind faith is something that's very dangerous. It's the same blind faith that could be the inspiration of the pious, that could also lead to the war cry of the evil. There's no logic, there's no reason why I'm doing something, and there's no boundary, there's no saying what I could do. John F. Kennedy said, the great enemy of the truth is very often not the lie, deliberate, contrived, and dishonest, but the myth. persistent, persuasive, and unrealistic. That's the danger of superstition. The third issue here, in regards to superstition, besides the fact the Torah says you can't believe in it, and besides the fact that it's the antithesis of Torah philosophy and the antithesis of what it means to be a human being, the third issue is it's the most dangerous. I'll give you an example why. When you start believing in all of these types of things, and we might be more sophisticated than to believe in black cats being anything, but we might have different types or different forms of superstition. When you start believing in these things, then you start to lose the clarity that God is in control of everything that happens. You start to think, well, 1 second, oh no, I forgot my red string at home. What's going to happen to me today? Am I going to be okay? I forgot to say my incantations earlier, and therefore, who knows what my fate's going to be. The positioning of the stars are such that it doesn't look so good for my destiny. That means when you get into these types of ideas, you lose sight of the fact that there's a creator of the universe who's in charge of everything that happens, and I think that is probably the most dangerous aspect of superstition. From the Jewish perspective, we believe in Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. There's one God who's in control of everything. We believe in Ein Od Milvado, which is there's nothing else in the universe that can have any impact on me whatsoever. No force, no power, no person. It's me and the creator of the universe. So I want to touch upon some examples of superstition / practical Kabbalah and analyze, do they have a source? Are they authentic or are they purely fictional? The first thing is the evil eye. The evil eye at first, I think we would all assume, is superstition. It's what our grandparents said, Kanai Nahara. But the truth is, you look throughout the Talmud, you'll see there are many references to Ayin Hara, to the evil eye. And therefore, as Jews, as people who want to understand and use the intellect, the question is, what in the world does that mean? And why is that fair? Why is it fair that some evil eye should have power over me, should be able to harm me? So there's two approaches. One approach is what I'll refer to as the rational approach, as to what the evil eye is. And this approach goes as follows. If you have a person who is blessed with many talents and qualities and gifts, whether it be wealth, health, wisdom, athletic ability, whatever it may be, if they flaunt those talents, if they show off, so to speak, and by doing so, that causes other people to feel jealous, to feel resentful. So, logic would dictate, if God gave you these resources for a reason, and what is that reason? That reason is to do good with it. Everything that we have, whether it's money, whether it's wisdom, whether it's any skill or talent, we were given this in order to utilize it to help other people, to do good things in the world. So if I'm using some of my talents in a way where I'm causing harm to others, so then the consequence of that might be, God says, I'm going to take some of these gifts away. You're not using them in the proper fashion. That's one approach. Now, what's somewhat comforting about this approach is that it makes it sound somewhat fair. It's not just that there is a spiritual force out there that can harm me, but it's a consequence to an action. If I don't use my blessings appropriately, and I use them in a way that I'm going to hurt others and cause jealousy, so then the result of that is God says, okay, we have to take some of those away. However, when you analyze the earlier sources, the earlier commentators, this does not seem to be the mainstream approach. I want to quote you from the Rabbi Yonah. The Rabbi Yonah, one of the great commentators of the 1200s, he speaks about the idea of Ayin Hara, the evil eye. And he says as follows. When a person who is not satisfied with life gazes with jealousy at his fellow who is wealthier than he not only causes harm to himself, but he can destroy the property of his fellow as well. For when a person is envious of another, the energy produced by his jealous thoughts can actually consume that which he is desirous of. The Rabbi Yonah seems to be saying there's some kind of reality to human thought. And there's something vicious, there's something harmful about jealousy. When I look at you and I'm envious, oh, look at that, I wish I had that as well, it's just not fair. It's not just within me. Now he does say it's harmful for oneself. Whenever you're jealous, the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos that jealousy removes a person from this world, which basically means I can't function, I can't live. Food doesn't taste good anymore. Anything that I have I can't appreciate because I'm constantly overwhelmed and on fire by the fact that why does she have that car and I'm stuck with this one? Why does she have that husband and I'm stuck with this one? That's the power of jealousy. It's obviously destructive to oneself, but says the Rabbi Yonah, that thought that you have can actually do something in the physical realm. If I'm envious of the car, somehow that energy that's produced by my thinking can have an impact on that car. You see here the power of the human thought. And this is actually based on a Kabbalistic idea, which is, just like we mentioned that everything here in the physical realm is only a manifestation of something that's more real, where it's rooted in the spiritual realm, and in that sense, the spiritual realm is affecting the physical realm. The opposite is true as well. We as human beings, the Zohar explains, we have the ability, based on the actions that we do, based on the words that we speak, based on the thoughts that we have, we actually can have an impact not only in this world, but in the celestial spheres as well. And in this case, the Rabbi Yonah is telling us that not only do I impact the heavens and all the other spiritual dimensions, but I impact my fellow's Rolls Royce. That's how he seems to define the power of Ayin Hara. It's not necessarily some form of spirit, but it's the human thought having a real and tangible implication. The question, however, is based on this approach. Why is that fair? In the first way, it was more rational perhaps. The whole idea was, you're not being a good guy. You're flaunting it. You're showing off all your money. You're showing off all of your prestige. So then it makes sense. It's some form of punishment. I'll take that away from you if you're not using it well. And the parent says to the child, I'm giving you a cell phone because I need to be able to get in contact with you when I'm picking you up from school. But if I see you're not using it well and you're playing games during school, then I'm taking it away. That's the first approach. But in the second approach, which seems to be the more authentic approach, it's not about me doing anything wrong. It's not about me showing off. It's just the reality that when someone's jealous of me, even if it's not my fault, that thought somehow can impact me. Why is that fair? Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat. That's what Abraham said to God. When God told him, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham's response was, is it possible that the judge of the entire universe doesn't act with justice? We could ask the same question here in regards to the evil eye. What's the answer to the question? The answer is, there's a faulty premise. Just because my thought can naturally have an impact on you or your property, that doesn't mean it's outside the realm or the control of the creator of the universe. Do you know what else also has an impact? If I take a 9mm and I shoot it through someone's window, the natural response, the natural reaction of that is his window will break. Why is that fair? If I take a stone and I throw it at someone's car, there are a lot of things in life that are natural. The fact that Ayin Hara can also be one of them doesn't mean it's outside the realm of God's control. We still would have the perspective of however things work, Hashem is in charge, the creator of the universe is in control of what happens. So the fact that it's a natural response to my thinking doesn't mean it's outside the realm of God. Basically, that's some of the academic issues of the evil eye, what it is, what it's not. How do we avoid it? Just like in regards to illness, there's certain things we do, even though God runs the world. It makes sense that if it's freezing outside, you don't want to go outside with a jacket on. A person has strep throat, you want to take a Z-Pack. We do things that make sense. We have to live in this illusion. So are there any practical ways to avoid the negative effects of ayin hara, of the evil eye? Anybody here own a red string? Are you wearing it right now?
Yeah,
Okay. Don't take this personally.
I won't.
Now it's interesting, recently, I don't know, the last 10, 20 years, the idea of a red string has caught on. Yeah, you have some of, Michael Jackson, Madonna, some of the great sages of our generation. But the truth is there a source for that? Is there any authentic classic source in our literature that would speak about a red string?
Yes.
You say yes.
Something not related to wearing it. It's something about red string. Not all.
No, but I want to know about wearing it. I don't want other examples of red strings. Where do we find anything about wearing a red string on the body is going to deflect or shield somebody from the effects of the evil eye? There is a source. There is a source, and I'll quote it to you. This is Tosefta. Tosefta is one of the bodies of work that were written around the times of the Mishnah. This is around 200 CE. And the Tosefta, this is in the back of Tractate Shabbos, the 7th chapter. It speaks about different violations of the Torah prohibition of following superstitious ways. And one of the examples it gives is HaKosher Mututelis al Yirecho, if you tie some kind of string around your thigh, V'chut Edom, or if you tie a red string al etzbo on your finger. By doing this, you're actually violating a Torah prohibition of following the superstitious customs of the non-Jewish pagan cults. So is there a source for wearing a red string? There is a source. But the only source that we have is telling us it's something not only does it not help, but we can't do. Question?
But I thought you were actually into the sources like Deborah, and she had like something about when she was like a prophetess, and she had a red string. I thought it was a source.
I haven't heard anyone bring that in regards to what?
I don't know the story fully. She was a judge.
She was a great judge. But in regards to wearing a red string on the body to avoid evil eye, the only potential source that I think we see is from here, which is basically saying don't do it. Yeah.
Just want to say that I was in Israel and I put a red string. I went to the hotel and gave to Tanaka and she gave me a red string. And then I went back and I was at the beach and the rabbi sees a red string in my hand and he says, "Did you know that a blue string is a lot more powerful?" And I said, "No, I did not know that. Is that true?" And he says, "No, but if I never told you it's not, then you'd probably go out and get a blue string." I said, "I probably would."
I hear. Listen, we should never be judgmental of anyone who wears red strings, because it's all coming from a very sincere source. If it could be a form of protection, why not? The only problem is you have to be skeptical when people are trying to sell you on these types of things. Right? For 4 easy payments of $29.99 a month, we'll get you 5 red strings to the whole family. Right? Then we say, no thank you, I'd rather not violate the Torah prohibition. So, yes, question.
If you're not supposed to have those strings, in Buddhism, how come there's those people at the hotel that are always passing out strings if you give them
You answered your own question.
Good question.
No, I'm saying, how come they're allowed to do it? I mean, people aren't allowed to have cameras, there are cameras, I can throw it out to have those strings.
That's a good question.
It's a good question. The question is if there's actually a prohibition on some level of wearing these red strings, so why is it allowed to have people standing by the western wall handing out these things to Jews? Why isn't there someone standing up and yelling at them and throwing rocks? Good question. But even though it is done from the authentic perspective, from the halachic perspective, there's no source saying to do it, and the only source we have that says anything close is really saying to avoid doing it. But this is from the Jewish law perspective. There's also a philosophical angle as well, I think, which is, let's say there was nothing wrong with it. Okay, it's neutral. Not necessarily positive, not necessarily negative. What could happen if I'm wearing a red string? It happens to go well with my jacket, whatever the case may be. Is there anything bad? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Because we're human beings. And the way that human beings work is we need to feel that we're growing. We need to feel that we're making progress. And all of us in this room clearly have some level of a spiritual yearning. And we have to therefore feel that I'm moving along. So the more things we do where we can fool ourselves into thinking that I'm moving along at a quicker pace, I'm accomplishing, I'm getting closer to my goal of being that enlightened person, so that means the real work that needs to be done might be overlooked. If I start focusing on some of the external things that don't really have a source, so it's a lot easier to start feeling complacent. I'm doing pretty good. Listen, today I have 2 red strings on, and I have the special white Nike tennis shoes, and I got the yarmulke that was made from wherever, and the special water that was blessed. I'm doing okay. I'm on my way. When I get to the office, I'm a jerk. And I yell at everyone that comes my way. And when I get home, I don't appreciate the supper that my wife makes. But I'm still working up. No, you're doing absolutely nothing. You're fooling yourself. You think of what Kabbalah is. Like we said, Kabbalah is Judaism. So all it means is it's a deeper level of insight or appreciation into what the Torah is teaching us. Now, if you take that which is intrinsically so subtle, and it's so delicate, and you make that into red strings and other physical manifestations, what you're really doing is you're missing the boat. The goal of Kabbalistic study is, let me get deeper. Let me get beyond the surface. Let me really see what's happening. Let me get in touch with what the Zohar calls the soul of the Torah. But if that experience just translates into wearing certain types of clothing and saying certain types of verses, the odds of me really getting deeper are very slim. So number 1, it might be prohibited, and number 2 is, philosophically speaking, it will definitely inhibit my growth. Therefore, what is the way to avoid ayin hara? What is the way to avoid the negative impact of evil eye? Huh? Good guess. What's that?
Deny it. Reject
To reject, that's interesting. There is actually a passage of the Talmud in Pesachim. It says that in regards, that's referring to something else, but also some kind of interesting spiritual discussion. And the Talmud has a line that the more you don't care about it, that danger, it won't harm you. So what does that mean? It's like a game. It's only there when my eyes are open. But if I close my eyes, I don't believe in it, it's not going to hurt me. So the way that some of the commentators explain that passage of Talmud, this is the Shla and others as well, what the Talmud saying is, if you're able to look beyond the natural world, and the natural world doesn't just mean people who might be violent or natural disasters that might occur, but even the spiritual potential harm out there, I'm able to look above all of that and say, listen, God runs the world. I'm going to be careful. I'm going to try to be safe. I'll wear a seatbelt. But I have bitachon, I have that clarity that what happens to me in my life is based on the creator of the universe. Therefore, these things can't harm you nearly as much because I'm not giving them credence. I'm in a sense, and I hate to use the analogy of the Matrix. I haven't seen the movie myself, but I've heard a lot about it, and there's so many interesting themes that are very connected to real Torah philosophy, interesting enough. But one of the ideas was in that movie, so I'm told, is that if a person would realize that they're in the Matrix, they realize they're in a make-believe world, they're in somewhat of an illusion, then they wouldn't be able to be harmed in the Matrix. They could transcend that, they could rise above that, and the same thing is true with life. If we have that perspective that whatever is going on around me, whether it's in the physical realm or even the spiritual forces out there, I know that God runs the world, and therefore I'm uplifting myself, I'm rising above all of those potential negative sources. I'll give you a more down-to-earth example though, which is, if you start to be a friendly person, then the evil eye can't harm you. What's the connection? What's the evil eye? So he said no matter how you view it, the more of the rational approach or more of the mystical approach, it's based on other people being jealous of what you have. It's that simple. So when are you jealous of somebody else? He's smarter than me, she's more beautiful than I am, they have more money than I do, all of the things that I don't have that I want. However, if that person was your best friend, are you still that jealous? Not as much. If that person was your son, are you jealous of your son? No. When there's such a strong love, some people are, you have exceptions. But when you have a strong connection, you have a relationship where I'm not just saying what you have, but I appreciate who you are. You're a giver, you're selfless, and I sense your love for me, then it's hard for me to hate you. It's hard for me to be jealous of you to that same intense degree. So if you want to know the best way to prevent the evil eye, it's very simple. Be a friendly, considerate, loving person. And that's the best way to avoid all of that harm.
So the evil eye is jealousy.
Right. The way that the Rabbi Yonah explains it is the energy that comes from other people's jealousy. 100%. Yes.
Would you put the Chomsa in the same category as the Meshrim?
Chamsa, I don't know where that comes from. I just don't know where that comes from. It might even have Islamic origins and somehow crept its way into Judaism. Just don't know where it comes from.
You can see also from the tribe of Yosef.
What's that?
You can see you from the tribe of Yosef.
Yeah, but you gotta find a source for that. You know, you have to. The red string is the one thing that I actually found a source for. In this case, it was in the opposite direction, but at least there's some mention of it. I want to speak about a couple other ideas that fall under this category of practical Kabbalah. The idea of checking names. There's a certain practice where it's done somewhat often, where you have a young couple thinking of getting married, but before they go too far, they go to the Kabbalist, and they write their names down on paper, their entire Jewish name. Yehuda, Zev, Ben, Aryeh, Ruven. And then she writes her name down. Rachel, Leah, Bas, Abraham, Menachem. Beautiful. And then the Kabbalist does as follows. Ready? Analyzes the names, perhaps the numeric value, perhaps other things behind the letters, and he'll tell you if it's a good shidduch or not, if it's a good idea. So I want to read to you there's a story with Rabbi Yaakov Hillel. He is actually one of the greats of our generation. He is the real deal. He is someone who's a tremendous Torah scholar, and at the same time is known by all the other greats as a real Kabbalist. But at the same time is very down to earth, very normal. And he has a very interesting book where he discusses a lot of these types of things, and he quotes a story that somebody came to him and they said, it was a young man, I was about to get married, and my future father-in-law told me that the custom we have in our family is always to go to Rabbi Friedman, the Kabbalist down the block, have him look at the names and just give us the thumbs up. And lo and behold, went to Rabbi Friedman, and it's not going to work. So this young man was obviously very disappointed. So he goes to Rabbi Yaakov Hillel and says, what should I do? So at the time, he was younger, and he said, listen, I think the whole thing is a farce, but the Steipler is here. Rabbi Yaakov Kanievsky, who was the great of that generation, he died in 1985. So let's go ask the Steipler go. They went to the Steipler in Bnei Brak, and the way that you would ask a question to the Steipler is you would write it down on a piece of paper, giving him all the information. He would look it over and then tell you his ruling. So they wrote it down for him, and as he was reading it, he was already older, he was becoming more and more disturbed, to the extent where his family had to come in and ask them to please leave because they were upsetting their father and grandfather. And he was there for 20 minutes reading this paper. Finally, he called them back in the room, and he basically told them, God forbid you should listen to such lies. This is not how we do things. Was there ever a time throughout history where perhaps a person with that wisdom could have looked into the names and seen the insight and personality? There could have been. But clearly, anyone who does that nowadays, you can know beyond a shadow of a doubt, he's not the real deal. Another interesting example is in regards to reading palms. There is an idea, and this we have early sources that discuss, going back to the times of the Gaonim, in the 900s, and that they write, the authors of the Mishnah, the Tanoim, who lived in the time after the Second Temple period, around 1200 CE, many of them had the ability, by analyzing your face, seeing your eyes, seeing your facial expressions, to have a glimpse into your soul. That was a power that some of the sages had. However, they themselves write in the 900s, we no longer have this power, we no longer have a tradition for how to do these types of things. And the same thing is true with reading the palm. It could be, once again, the sages of the Mishnah were able to somehow tell something about your personality by looking at your hand, and the idea being that somehow, because the physical is all a manifestation of the spiritual, so everything on me, everything that's part of my physical body, is on some level a window into who I am on a spiritual level. So that's where it comes from. Nowadays, however, we don't do this. There's a story here as well where there is a young man that wrote the following letter to Reb Shach. Reb Shach was also one of the giants of the 20th century, and he writes as follows: "It is known that the lines of a person's hand reveal his future, and I have seen on others that it comes true. After reading books on the subject, I looked at my own hand and saw the lines of marriage reveal a dark future. What I have seen gives me no rest, especially now that I have come of marriageable age." That's the letter he writes to Reb Shach. Reb Shach responds, "It is absolutely forbidden to read palms or to believe what is seen in them. The Torah states very clearly, 'You shall be perfectly faithful to Hashem your God,' which means we rely on God and nothing else. Do not worry about what you saw in your palm. You were simply shown what you wanted to see. For," and he quotes the passage of the Talmud, "in the path that a person wishes to go, he is led." So in regards to analyzing people's names, in regards to reading palms or reading facial expressions, could there have been such a thing? Yes. Nowadays, no. Fortune tellers, people who claim to be psychics. Is there such a power in the world? There could be. Can we go to these types of people? The answer is no. And once again, it's based on that same verse in the Torah, just stick with God and you'll be okay.
What is the true purpose in Jewish society of a true Kabbalist? I mean, why study it besides to get a deeper meaning of the Torah?
Well, I think that's precisely the point. By studying these ideas, you get a deeper and more sophisticated meaning of the Torah, then you have a greater grasp on the universe, a greater grasp on human beings. but it doesn't mean therefore you have a license to perform magic tricks. So I think we're saying nowadays, those who study Kabbalah and they're the real deal, and they have real yeshivas, real study halls for this type of thing, it's possible to have people who are very well versed in lots of Kabbalistic literature. But in regards to some of these things, which are more in the realm of the practical Kabbalah, in regards to that, we're saying, stay away, because that wisdom is lost. And that's going back even to the 1500s, when the Arizal himself said that that was lost. There's an idea of a skula. Ever heard of a skula before?
Mhm.
It's a skula for parnasa. It's a good omen for livelihood. It's a good omen for health. What is the ultimate skula that the Torah teaches us? I want to share with you a passage written by Chaim Volozhin. Chaim Volozhin, one of the main disciples of the Vilna Gaon in the 1700s. He says that if a person is in a situation of great danger, and there's no option, there's no way out, it seems to be hopeless, if a person thinks in his or her mind, Ein od milvado, which is a quote from the Torah, which means there is nothing else besides the creator of the universe, and a person continues to reinforce that thought over and over again, and just focuses on that reality, with the thought that nothing else could touch me, nothing else could harm me, that itself could save somebody from a dangerous situation. And it's not magical. It's the same idea that we quoted before from the Talmud, that if you're able to transcend this facade, you're able to break free from the illusion that we live in, so then you're on a different plane. There's a different set of rules that apply to you now. I want to read you a story. It's a true story, really quoted from two separate, both very authentic sources. It's a story in regards to the Brisker Rav. Brisker Rav, one of the greats of pre-war Europe and post-war. It says, one morning during the Brisker Rav's stay in Warsaw, Rabbi Yisrael Moshe Shapiro, the son-in-law of the Beis HaLevi, came to visit the Brisker Rav, carrying a newspaper under his arm. The Rav asked him, is there anything interesting inside? No, not particularly. The Rav persisted, however, and said, I want to see the newspaper. He took a quick glance at the headlines, and his eyes immediately caught sight of one of the headings, declaring that the Russians were handing over control of Vilna to Lithuania. When he saw this, the Rav immediately resolved to move to Vilna. He felt now that it was under Lithuanian control, that it might be a safe place to go. He didn't want to return to Brisk because at the time it was under the control of the Russians, and he was afraid the communists would arrest him if he would return. In order to get to Vilna, he had to go through Bialystok. But this was easier said than done, for Jews were not allowed to travel by train. Trains were carefully inspected by the Gestapo, and anyone who looked Jewish was shot on the spot. So Rabbi Soloveitchik therefore decided to try and organize a group to go by carriage. The Rav got several people together and hired a large coach. He himself sat low in the back to avoid being seen in case they were checked by the Germans. The journey should have taken 3 days, but since they couldn't travel through settled areas at night because the Germans had imposed a strict curfew, they were on the road for much longer. The entire route was littered with the ruins of war, with the remains of houses destroyed by the constant shelling and bombing cluttered the roadside. This journey was full of miracles, however. One night, the Rav's carriage entered a Polish town by the name of Malshin. The driver was unfamiliar with the town and soon got lost. He tried every direction, but wherever he turned, he would always see German encampments. They continued wandering around like this for about a half an hour. All the houses were locked up tight, and there was no one in the streets who would show them the way out of town. They continued wandering around, going from street to street, all the time in deadly danger. Suddenly they saw an old German and asked him, which way to Bialystok? The old man started yelling at them, how can you roam around the streets during the curfew? Don't you realize you could be killed any minute? He immediately gave them directions for leaving the town, and they hastily departed. Later on they found out that a German patrol had been active in that area of the town where they had met the old German, and any Jew found there had been shot on the spot. The roads were full of the Nazi murderers. As they approached the Russian border post in the vicinity of Bialystok, they had to complete the last kilometer of their journey by foot. They all left the coach and started the last leg of the trip to the border. Suddenly, around halfway there, 2 German soldiers approached the Rav and asked him, "Where is your gun? Where is your money?" That was their custom. When they caught someone, they would immediately ask about his gun first and then his money. One of the soldiers started to manhandle the Rav, but then a 3rd soldier came and ordered his release. He let him go, and they walked a minute to Russia. When they got to Russia, the Brisker Rav explained, he said, "I'll tell you what happened." This is speaking to his family. He said, "The whole time in the wagon, I kept on repeating the words, Ein od milvado. There is nothing else but a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashem runs the world. Nothing can touch me." However, once we got off the wagon and we started walking, I lost focus. I got a little bit excited, and I stopped thinking about Ein od milvado. And at that moment, the 2 Nazis came up to me. And right away, I had to go back into that trance of Ein od milvado, and I ignored them. They weren't there, and all there was me and God. And at that point in time, the 3rd Nazi came and said, "Let him go." This is one story of many. There are many stories that don't end this way. However, the idea is, and this is based on Reb Chaim Volozhin, that there's something unique about having the realization that God is in control of everything. Somehow that takes you out of this reality on some level and puts you on a different plane. That's Ein od milvado. To conclude, number one, when we speak about practical Kabbalah, and we have to manage our way around the superstitious, we have to try to traverse these waters that are so polluted, so to speak. So many areas that have gone so wrong, and there's so many misconceptions and misunderstandings and misapplications. And to be aware of, number one, the danger of being superstitious is harmful. It's harmful because the Torah says we can't be. Number two, it's really a denial of the foundation of Judaism, a denial of using the mind, of using the intellect. And number three, which we said is perhaps most dangerous, is it helps me, or it enables me to lose focus from reality, which is that God runs the world. In our day and age, these types of things are very prevalent. And I think you would assume there's so much advancement and there's so much brilliance in the world. Why would people still be into this type of stuff? Why is it possible that a well-educated person would be superstitious? I think the answer is because with the technology that we have, with the high-speed internet that's getting faster and faster every second, we need a quick fix. We need a way to go from 0 to 60, spiritually speaking, without putting too much effort, without too much focus. And that's why these things are so enchanting. Because we hear about, I can just wear the string, and I can just say that, and I can do this, and I can wear these types of clothing, and then I'm there. That's so appealing. And that's why it's so in. That's why it's such a great business. But the Torah perspective is, you don't become a holy person by doing holy things. You become a holy person and an elevated person and an enlightened person by years and years of living, of growing, of conflict, of struggle, of transcendence. Wearing a string, doing cute little things here and there, it's not going to change us. It's a very tempting area to get involved with, but it's clear from all of our sources, when we dabble into Kabbalah in general, we dabble into the theoretical Kabbalah, we dabble into the meditative Kabbalah, which will be next week, but this area of the magic, we stay far, far away from. Have a wonderful evening.
The reason we do it is because my parents did it. When my son was born, I put a red ribbon on the bassinet.
You did what?
Put a red ribbon on the bassinet. I said, what is this? I'm not.
give you one motivation. But that was part of the package of the Torah given to Jews. And he said, I was like, put it together around the year 140 CE. My hunch was that anyone who will say that by opening up to the whole world, there's that much more money available. Oh, really? That makes sense. The first one to discover these new ideas of monotheism, part of that was maybe too. Any prophet that you could assume had a very good grasp of all aspects of Torah. Mordecai, they were all prophets. If you made it to that level of being able to communicate with God, that makes a pretty good idea of what's going on. It's part of Torah. Listen, any man who's welcome to learn, not as well, but it's Torah. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
We're good. Take care.
Tuesdays. I mean, we happen to be learning through the Torah. No, we can set a time also. Okay. I think the perspective of, listen, out of all the things that your child could be immersed in, it's pretty good. You know, maybe he's doing some things that other segments of Judaism might say are not so authentic, but you know, it's okay. He's happy and he's good. He's doing a lot of the real deal. That's huge. That's huge.
I believe that, and I think for what he did before, there were certain things that he didn't necessarily want. It's for him.
I think it's nice stuff there.
And it happens to work in string. So
I'll talk about the,
That's your
sounds good. Have a good night.
Here's the goal. Look, Rick, building. If you finish it, I was dude in Miami. He had this fantastic, penthouse over there. And I go there to take this to try to bridge. He's selling all of this stuff. Basically, it's inspired this high-end,
No, it was a nice.
$1 billion.
Thing. It's very dangerous
All this stuff. He's just going
to go down